It's all about money. With your host, CPA and forensic accountant, Sam Rosen.
You're watching It's All About Money. Nobody knows more about money than accountants. Hi, I'm Sam Rosenfarb. I'm a forensic accountant. I've been an accountant for over 30 years, and I can tell you from experience that people are irrationally motivated by money. I've been in numerous disputes about money revolving around brothers and sisters who fight over how much money their parents have left them, husbands and wives fighting the War of the Roses after living together for many years. I've been involved in partnership disputes with people who've known each other for 10, 20, 30 years who virtually kill each other over money. I've seen people steal from the government, cheat on their taxes, steal from their employers, steal from their children's trust funds. I've seen people's greed control their behavior. This show is all about educating you, teaching you about how you can spend, invest, control, and learn about money and its place in your life. This episode of It's All About Money should really be named It's All About the Lack of Money. We are here to discuss bankruptcy. If you or your business can't meet your financial obligations, what options exist for you? With us today are two of the preeminent experts in New Jersey's bankruptcy field. Ken Rosen is an attorney and a partner with the law firm of Raven Saracen of Roseland, New Jersey. He's the managing editor of Real Estate Workout News and Business Credit Legal Alert. He's an MBA in corporate finance and has been bankruptcy counsel for numerous large, well-known companies. Ed Bond is a CPA at the accounting firm of Beatis & Company of West Orange, New Jersey. Mr. Bond is a CPA, a certified fraud examiner, and he's certified as a bankruptcy expert. He's the president of the New Jersey State Board of Accountancy and has 35 years of leadership positions in New Jersey business and financial organizations. Ed, you've been around for a long time as a leader in this community. What's the New Jersey State Board of Accountancy about? What's their role?
Actually, the board is a division of the Department of Consumer Affairs, who regulates professional boards, and the accounting board is there to regulate the profession, to regulate the licensees. We license, we take license away, we regulate disputes, and basically we are there to protect the public.
So as president of the board, you're the top accountant in the state. That's pretty impressive. How long have you been involved with the State Board of Accountancy?
I'm glad you said I'm the top accountant. I hope everybody else thinks so too.
Well, it's true. Ed, I've known you for 12, 13 years, and you are the top accountant in the state.
You bring back a good incident,
right.
A good memory to me.
Right. Ken, how'd you get involved in bankruptcy work?
Got done with business school, saw an ad on the bulletin board at Columbia Business School for a financial analyst. The ad was by the United States trustee, part of the Department of Justice, which administers bankruptcy cases. And what was supposed to be a purely financial job turned out to be more legal than financial, and ended up as a bankruptcy attorney.
So you decided to leave the trustee's office and go to work at a bankruptcy firm?
I was at the United States trustee's office in New York for about 2.5 years, and then I went into private practice, initially in New York, and then I moved to New Jersey back in '84.
Is there a lot of fraud in bankruptcy cases?
I wouldn't say there's a lot of fraud. I'd say fraud is not uncommon. We see it with increasing frequency in the business Chapter 11s. The type of fraud seems to be changing almost with each case.
What kind of fraud? What do you mean by types?
We've seen cases where, for example, someone sells goods to a customer that they've never met, that they don't know. They can't do a real credit check on them. The client that I represented sold goods, told the customer they wanted to pick up a certified check. Driver takes a trailer load of goods to Brooklyn, picks up what they thought was a certified check. Driver wasn't familiar with what a certified check is supposed to look like, and it turned out that the purchaser had rented a room, rented a little warehouse, took a rubber stamp that they got at the stationery store, stamped certified, put some pin dots in it, scribbled a name, and the trucker didn't realize it really wasn't a certified check.
So the trucker accepted a check that was appeared to be certified just by the stamp.
And as a result of that case, I warn people all the time, make sure that when you're sending your representative to pick up a certified check,
that he knows what a certified check is.
That he knows what a certified check's supposed to look like.
That's pretty interesting. Are most bankruptcy filings legitimate? I mean, do people...
Yeah, I think most Chapter 11s are legitimate.
What is Chapter 11? You mentioned Chapter 11.
Well,
tell us what that means.
Chapter 11 is really the reorganization chapter mostly used for businesses, although Chapter 11 can contemplate just liquidating the assets of a company and distributing the proceeds. Chapter 11 can even be used by individuals.
When would somebody use it?
Well, if you're a corporation that has...
Well, let's assume I have a business and I owe lots of money to lots of people. There's a lot of businesses do, and I can't pay. Does filing bankruptcy allow me not to pay my debts?
Well, it gives you a reprieve from paying your debts. Ultimately, a day of reckoning comes. The benefit of a Chapter 11 is you get the relief that the automatic stay gives you. In other words, you can spend time in Chapter 11 without having to pay your pre-bankruptcy claims.
Before I filed.
The claims that arose prior to you filing bankruptcy. But eventually a time comes when the creditors are going to want to negotiate a reorganization and a repayment plan.
Well, if I own a company and I know I'm going to file for bankruptcy, aren't I going to take all the money out first so that there's less money to pay all the creditors? Just take it out in salary, or?
Well,
not if you're an honest debtor.
Well, are most debtors honest? What's your experience?
I would say, yeah. Most debtors try to be honest. Eventually, they might be led through some, whatever the circumstances might be, to do things they shouldn't do. But I don't think necessarily that the debtor would do this intentionally, or his plan is to do it. I think he gets boxed into a corner.
So his plan originally is not to scam these vendors or creditors. That's not his plan.
Not the majority of them.
What is the majority? What happens?
The majority of business there'll be a downturn in business. Collections will slow up. His management is not what it should be, or not what it used to be. They live on past laurels. They made a lot of money. I think things are never going to go bad. They don't adjust to the times. It can be a number of different circumstances that are going to bring about it. And usually, they don't want to recognize it. They don't want to recognize that something bad is happening. They don't want to recognize that they might be confronted with trying to...
A good example of times changing, markets changing, businesses changing is what's gone on with the home improvement industry. Retailers that sell home improvements, building supplies, hardware, have been beat up quite a bit by the likes of Home Depot. Mm-hmm. They've made life very difficult for the small hardware retailers.
They've taken a lot of those customers by offering greater variety, more credit,
exactly
more
right.
prices. And so what happens?
Well, as a result, increasingly the small home center, the small independent lumberyard or hardware store is finding it very, very difficult to hang on. The market is consolidating.
What's the concept of a bankruptcy court? I mean, why do bankruptcy courts exist? What's the society's rationale?
The concept of bankruptcy really was to give people, including businesses, a fresh start. I think it's a recognition by Congress and by the courts that we all gain more by businesses reorganizing than by businesses liquidating when they become insolvent. In other countries, I believe, for example, in England, you don't have the same type of reorganization procedures. If you become insolvent, you get liquidated much, much more quickly.
And what's the result? You think more employees are out of work as a result, or?
I don't know whether you can really make that statement. Eddie, what do you think about the likelihood of success generally in Chapter 11? What's been your experience?
The likelihood is really in Chapter 11 is very small. Likelihood of success. I would say that probably anywhere from 18 to 15% of those companies that file Chapter 11 actually complete their plan. Complete the
actually
plan.
Emerge successfully.
Emerge
right.
with a plan. Now, the rate on those that are successful is probably maybe 10 to 15%
so
of those that
15% emerge, 85% are liquidated.
It's probably more than that.
More than that.
On a general.
So you think more than 90% of the companies that file in 11 are eventually liquidated?
Eventually are liquidated.
And of the 10 or 15% that do emerge with a plan, only 10 or 15% of those are ever successful.
Will be completely successful. That's correct.
And understand, the Chapter 11 process is a very expensive process. It's time-consuming. There's a lot of professional fees involved.
When should our viewer consider filing Chapter 11?
I think.
What does that mean? What's the average? What are the requisites for this filing to the average viewer?
To me, a Chapter 11 is appropriate if you have a company that's burdened with a lot of debt, but that has a fundamentally viable business. If the business is not fundamentally viable or cannot be made viable, then Chapter 11 is really nothing more than a last straw.
So you mean if the business could be viable without their existing debt? If all the debt went away, a lot of businesses would be viable if all the debt went away.
Not necessarily.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
That's not so.
Tell me
a lot of businesses suffer from poor management. So even if the debt went away, the business is not going to be
Management's
viable.
still poor.
That's correct. That's correct. And I had an example of that in the case where I was a trustee in Chapter 11. There was a dispute between the family, and as a result, they needed an independent party to get in there to resolve the dispute between the parties, somebody who can now give a fresh look. Right. And that's in essence what you need. You need a fresh look.
So sometimes managers are just so poor that even if all the debt goes away, they still dig themselves into another hole.
And what about if you're manufacturing a product that time has passed by? Remember the old mimeographs, the blue mimeographs? Right. I mean, who do you know that uses a mimeograph today in an age when everyone's using his photocopy machine?
Right, or even higher tech than a photocopy machine. What about the average person who's accumulated more debt that they can handle?
Sam,
what should they do?
I can't tell you how many Chapter 7s I see on a daily basis where the credit card debt is between $50,000 and $100,000. In our society today,
and these are people who are earning how much generally?
These are people who may have outstanding credit card debt which exceeds the amount of their annual income.
Wow.
And what I think people are doing is getting credit cards is very easy.
It is pretty easy. I get them in the mail, unsolicited.
Living on credit cards is
with a line of credit attached to it, right?
Exactly
sure.
Right.
Ken, it might be good to explain the difference between the Chapter 11, the Chapter 7, and the Chapter 13.
Well, Chapter 7 is basically liquidation. You file a Chapter 7, you exempt a certain amount of your assets from the claims of creditors and everything.
What assets are exempt for an individual?
For example, in certain states, your home might be exempt. In certain states...
That's not true in New Jersey.
No,
right?
not in New Jersey. Your IRA or your pension.
If it's a federal law, why is it state by state specific?
Well, the way the bankruptcy code works, there are state exemptions and there are federal exemptions. Each state makes a decision whether or not its citizens will have the federal exemption or the state exemption. For example, New York, if I recall correctly, recently said you can only have the New York exemptions. If you go bankrupt, you don't get an option to use the federal exemptions.
And there are greater exemptions?
Right. For example, you may have read many times about people that establish their residencies in Florida to take advantage of the Florida exemptions, because in Florida, the exemption covers your whole house. So
irrespective of how expensive it is?
Right. So you would be well advised to buy a very expensive house in Florida, put all your money into the house, and file bankruptcy in Florida.
Buy a $2 million house, borrow on your credit cards, or buy as expensive a house as you can, and then file bankruptcy. Does that work?
I'm not going to say that a plan such as that wouldn't. I'm not going to say that such a plan would withstand the scrutiny of the courts.
Can you plan for bankruptcy?
Sure. I mean, there are a lot of people that establish their residencies in Florida long before they're having a financial problem. There are people that establish trusts, spendthrift trusts, long before they're having...
What's a spendthrift trust?
They put money into a trust that they can no longer gain access to. The money is permanently put in the trust so that if they file a bankruptcy petition, the trustee can't get access to those monies and give it to creditors.
So whatever's in the spendthrift trust is exempt from my creditors?
Generally,
and what's the disadvantage of a spendthrift trust?
Can't get the money back.
I can never get it back.
Once you put it in the trust.
But I could use it to live on, right?
Well, it depends how the trust is structured.
But I could create a trust that I could use to live on. And
I would doubt very much that if the trust was created in such a way that you really retain the benefits of the trust, of the dollars completely, that it would be viewed as a true trust. But I admit to you, Sam, I'm not a trust and estates attorney. I'm a bankruptcy attorney.
Right.
But those vehicles are similar to what the Brennan case is all about, if I'm not mistaken. Isn't that right?
That's right.
The offshore trust. I'm not too familiar with
the Brennan case, but we read about...
My understanding is that the issues, Ed, in that case are whether or not the trusts that were established will withstand the scrutiny of the court. I think there was an examiner appointed in that case to examine into the trusts, to examine certain transfers of assets outside of the United States.
What's alleged? That he's put numerous assets in a foreign trust. Bob Brennan, this is the securities fraud perpetrator.
Well, I'm not too familiar with the allegations detail by detail, but the allegations are probably very similar to what we see in many other bankruptcy cases. People put money into trusts, people put money into Florida real estate.
They give it to relatives?
They may repay loans to friends and relatives in order to put dollars into what I'll call a safe harbor.
Right.
You know, we have a saying in our office, you know, someday someone will come to us to talk about bankruptcy planning at the right time rather than come to us too late. Most people come to us too late. I suspect they come to you too late.
As I said before,
Well,
they don't want to face the
What's the
inevitable.
accountant's role in bankruptcy, Ed? What does the accountant do?
It's a financial role. I mean, we will advise the debtor. We will advise.
Ed, I'm sorry. We have to take a short break. We'll get back to what the accountant's role is when we get back with It's All About Money. Thanks. Sorry to cut you off. You're watching It's All About Money. We've got two experts in bankruptcy, Ed Bond and Ken Rosen, talking about bankruptcy and how to protect yourself. Ed, right before the break, we're talking about the accountant's role in bankruptcy. Tell us what...
As I started to say, it's our role to advise the client, to advise, if it's a debtor, we provide the financial service to the debtor to advise him, to try to get him through the process. If he's in a Chapter 11, we will prepare his financials, we will prepare his projections, we'll help him with his plan of arrangement, with his disclosure statement, in order to get him to the point where he can emerge from the Chapter 11.
And if you're representing the creditors?
It's usually the creditors committee. And when you're representing the creditors committee, you work with counsel. We work with Ken many times, and in cases where we will follow his direction, we will search for preference actions to recover money for the creditors.
What does preference mean? What does that mean?
I was just going to say one of the most important things that Ed does for the attorney and for the client when Ed is working on behalf of the debtor is to figure out whether or not the debtor has a viable business plan, because the worst thing that you can do is to put a company into Chapter 11 without any kind of exit strategy.
Right.
In other words, the one thing we would never want to do is put a client in Chapter 11 and not have any idea whether or not the business is viable, and that's something we would call Ed on.
And the reason you wouldn't do that is the costs and the time and the
Chapter 11
loss of control.
There's a loss of control. Chapter 11 is frequently similar to operating in a fishbowl. There's accounting fees, attorney's fees, attorneys and accounting fees on the other side of the fence, meaning the creditors committee. And when I represent a creditors committee, I'll frequently call Ed to take a look and find out whether or not dollars went to places that, let us say, they should not have gone to.
And that's fraud. Who's committing the fraud? Who are the people that are committing the fraud, Ed?
It could be a number of people. Usually, it could be the CFO, the Chief Financial Officer. It could be the principal. It could be the accountant in some cases.
The accountant for the company? Accountants don't commit fraud.
Well, there are certain accountants that will issue statements that shouldn't be issued, and under those circumstances, they end up appearing before the board.
What's your most interesting case?
I had a case about 6-8 years ago where the controller for a manufacturing company happened to own a business on the side. And he was taking checks made payable to his employer, and he was depositing them into his business. And how was he doing that? He went to a local bank, opened up a checking account. They gave him a bunch of blank deposit tickets and a bunch of blank checks. And he would manually type on the deposit ticket the name of his employer, but the code numbers at the bottom read his own side business.
Right.
So when the teller received the check, the teller would compare the check payable to the employer look at the deposit ticket, not realize that the number code at the bottom was for a different entity.
So
And,
they were depositing checks made out to XYZ Corp
into ABC Corp.
into ABC Corp's account.
And then the other case that
That's pretty bright.
yeah, pretty clever.
Right.
And then I always, when I'm
And how was he
interviewing,
caught?
he was caught because at some point in time his employer discovered that there was about $400,000 that couldn't be accounted for, and they started, doing an audit of their customers to find out why particular customers had not paid their bills.
How long did this scheme go on?
I bet it must have gone on almost a year.
A year before he recognized that his customers weren't paying?
Well, when they called up the customer to say, hey, we noticed that your accountant's past due, and the customer says, what do you mean it's past due? We've
I've paid
you religiously.
Right.
And then I always tell people, when I interview new clients, I frequently ask how their marital relationship is. And they always look at me and they say, well, what's the relationship of, what's the bearing of my marital relationship on this case, or this potential case? And I always tell them about a case I had in New York City where someone who owned a restaurant was in Chapter 11. And the big question of the day is how much of the business was cash, how much of it was credit cards, and how much cash was being taken out under the table. And this guy didn't realize that his estranged wife, who was very estranged, had kept a little black book and was able to tell the state of New York sales tax authorities how much chop meat the guy bought.
So she knew everything about the business.
She knew stuff about his business that no one else would have known, and to the best of my knowledge.
The woman scorned is, well, I forgot what the word is, but
you got to be very careful, what other people know.
We had a similar situation, a restaurant down the shore area. Also, a couple going through a bitter divorce, and it ended up that the wife had access to another set of records. So
second set of books.
If you compared one with the other, you would see on a consistent basis there was 10% of deposit taken off every day. Again, same as Kenny. I mean,
how much money was involved in these frauds?
Well, the sales tax was a few $100,000.
That's big.
And the guy that was taking the sales tax dollars was charged criminally, not merely civilly. And the state of New York's position was it was larceny because you took dollars that belonged to me.
And was he ultimately prosecuted?
I believe he was. So you got to be careful.
What's involved in proving a fraud, proving a case?
Proving a case is difficult, especially in bankruptcy, because the records usually are not in the best of shape. Many times you'll have a debtor that if he's involved with cash, it's a very difficult very difficult task to try to follow that trail. They will sabotage the computers. They'll do anything they can to break the trail. So normally in a bankruptcy it is difficult. However, there are some debtors that ran a clean ship. There are records, and once the records are there, if the fraud was committed, it's easy to be able to.
Is there a season for fraud, Ken?
Well,
are more bankruptcies filed?
There's certainly a seasonality to bankruptcy. For example, in the retail business, at the end of Christmas, when cash is at its peak and inventory is light, and creditors' claims are at their peak, you see a lot of bankruptcies.
I mean, that's when these retail stores owe a lot of money to their vendors, and they've just collected a lot of money.
Right, and now
they're
flush with cash, and perhaps there's a secured creditor, meaning a bank that has a personal guarantee. So you want to file the Chapter 11 when you've got as much cash as possible. I think even in the personal bankruptcy arena, people tend to load up on credit card debt during the Christmas season.
What's one of your favorite cases, Ed?
My favorite case happened to be, I probably alluded to it before, where I had the opportunity to serve as a trustee for Chapter 11. There was a botanical manufacturer in
what kind of manufacturer?
Botanical.
What does that mean? Botanical sounds like plants. How do you manufacture
That's exactly
plants?
Right. Well,
I thought plants grew in the ground.
From plants, you would manufacture fragrances, you manufacture
they manufacture
pharmaceutical items.
From plants.
That's correct. The company was substantially in debt, and I recognized the problem when coming in. Again, it was a management problem. What we did is we sort of eliminated the management that was creating the problem, and within a 2-year period we accumulated enough cash, we accumulated enough interest, enough profits to be able to go to the court with a plan of arrangement and have 5 competing bids bidding for the business.
So you mean add the business for sale?
Well, we prepared a plan of arrangement for the creditors, and at that particular time, if I'm not mistaken, Ken, isn't it an opportunity for all creditors to come before, anybody can come before or any interested party can come before the
I mean, Eddie,
the court.
Ed, that points out what we call debtor syndrome. You know, many times a debtor just can't confront its problems. They think that they know all the answers.
Sure.
They can answer all
They've
the
been managing the business.
They've been doing such a great job for the last 30 years, they can solve the problems. And I think Ed's pointing out the fact that frequently bringing in a third party, typically an accountant, to take a fresh look is what solves the problems.
So this botanical company was one of those 1% that actually emerged successfully.
Yeah, not only did it emerge successfully, but we paid creditors 100 cents cash.
Everybody got 100
100 cents cash, secured and unsecured. They also got interest on their money from the date of the filing to the date of the payment.
Well, that's pretty commendable.
As a matter of fact, today the company is a successful public company, operating very profitably. The stock probably, when the sale was made, was selling for about 75 cents. Today it's over $6.
That's terrific.
You should have taken your fees in stock rather than cash.
I made a lot of mistakes while practicing.
What's your experience with the U.S. Attorney's Office? How do they get involved in bankruptcy?
The U.S. Attorney's Office gets involved, but my experience is you have to be able to present to them a case in a cogent manner, meaning you can't just go to the U.S. Attorney's Office and say, we think there was a fraud, we want you to do all the forensic examination, we want you to do all of the investigation.
Isn't that their job? Aren't they supposed to investigate crimes?
I think the problem is that there's a lot of stuff that they are burdened with doing. Bankruptcy frequently doesn't take the highest priority, so it becomes the burden of the attorneys and the accountants to do the investigation and bring them the case with a lot of the information and allegations already proven.
How'd you get involved in bankruptcy work, Ed?
I guess it goes back about probably 25, 27 years ago when I had come back to accounting. I had left accounting for pastures that were much greener. That was the securities industry at that time. And if you remember the securities industry back in 1968, I guess it was flying. Right. Sure. Everybody was making a lot of money. The brokers were pocketing whatever they could. 1973, 1974, everything fell apart. Went back to practice accounting, and the firm I went back with happened to be doing some bankruptcy work. And at that point, I guess the accountants were being paid, I think it was something like $75 a day.
If you or anyone you know has a bankruptcy problem, call an expert. If you want any information about tonight's program, write to me, Sam Rosen, 75 Livingston Avenue, Roseland, New Jersey. Thanks, and don't let the greed get you. Thanks, gentlemen.
Thanks.